Hagergarinago, labulurago.
Ay, liru tivirungo ingine teleginye, diru nagambungo, luagu namulenye.
Anirela, hagergarinago, labulurago.
Hello, and welcome to the Peace Corps at 60 and Beyond, a Towering Task panel discussion. Thank you for joining us. Real-time live captioning and American Sign Language interpretation are available during today's live program. To view the simulcast that includes these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing this program after the live broadcast, please note that it will also be made available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Jim Deutsch, and today we invite you to participate in a conversation about the significance and impact of the Peace Corps, since it was established by President John Kennedy's executive order on March 1st, 1961, exactly 60 years ago this week. This year, 2021, also marks 10 years since the Smithsonian Folklife Festival featured a program on the Peace Corps on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. And now, with Peace Corps at 60, we have the opportunity to discuss what lies ahead for the agency at this pivotal moment in its history. We'll be taking your comments in the live chat below, so please participate. This program is in partnership with the National Peace Corps Association and the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience. If you don't know the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, I encourage you to check out festival.si.edu to learn about our programs, education resources, and much more. And now I'd like to welcome our guests. First, Alana DeJoseph, Director of A Towering Task, and Amali RPCV, that's Returned Peace Corps Volunteer.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Next, Carol Spahn, Acting Director of the Peace Corps and a Romania RPCV.
Hi, welcome.
Next, Raina Green, Curator Emerita at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History and in Ethiopia RPCV.
Great to be here.
And Rahama Wright, founder of Shea Yeleen Health and Beauty and Amali RPCV.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So I think we'll begin the conversation. I'd like to ask each of you to briefly tell us something about yourselves, and maybe we'll go in the order in which you came on the screen. So we'll start with Alana DeJoseph.
Hi, so I had the privilege to produce and direct A Towering Task, the documentary about the history of the Peace Corps that many of you just saw and hopefully will see if you haven't seen it. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali and have been in documentary production ever since.
Okay, thank you, Alana. And Carol Spahn?
Great. Well, first, thank you to the Smithsonian Institute and the Folklife Festival for putting on such a wonderful event. I know you were a big part of the Peace Corps' 50th anniversary celebrations and feel very fortunate to be here in the context of our 60th anniversary. I am currently serving as the Acting Director of Peace Corps. Formerly, I was the Chief of Operations in the Africa region, covering Eastern and Southern Africa. And recently completed a tour as country director of Peace Corps in Malawi from 2014 to 2019. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer, a small business volunteer in Romania, along with my husband from 1994 to 96, and have held various jobs in the private and public sector, primarily in international development for the last 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Raina Green?
Hi, I was Peace Corps 1984, excuse me, good Lord, 1964, actually, 57 years ago, and served in Ethiopia. And since then, I have been a university professor in various institutions and spent 35 years at the Smithsonian as a curator and director of American Indian programs.
Okay, and Rahama Wright.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Rahma Wright. I am the founder of Shailene, a social impact company I started after serving in the Peace Corps in 2005. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali. I served at a community health center about 2.5 hours outside of Bamako, the capital. But I'm also so my dad did the Peace Corps in Burkina Faso in the 70s, and that's how he met my mom. So we all know that Peace Corps is also coined as the dating corps. And so I followed in his footsteps and always knew I was going to do the Peace Corps since high school. And so after I graduated college, I went to school in upstate New York, SUNY Geneseo, majored in political science and international affairs. I knew I was going to serve in the Peace Corps. And when I arrived at my community health center in Mali, it was the first time I had experienced living in a rural village in West Africa, even though my mom is West African from Ghana. And so it was a really transformative experience and created the exposure and also helped me kind of figure out what I wanted to do long-term in terms of being eventually an entrepreneur. So in 2011, for the 50th, we actually brought 3 of our shea butter producers from Northern Ghana to the US, and they made shea butter on the National Mall. And so that was an incredibly exciting moment for me, as well as the women that we work with in West Africa. So happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to have you all here. And as Rahama said, in 2011, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival featured the Peace Corps, a program called the Peace Corps at 50, promoting rural peace and friendship. And part of what we do often at the Folklife Festival is to understand the culture of the groups, places we are highlighting. And that's maybe my first question for all of you is there a shared culture of the Peace Corps that is shared organization-wide? I know, Rahama, you were describing the Peace Corps as a family. So I'd like to maybe ask each of you to talk about what you see as a shared culture. Maybe I'll start with Raina, since you are our earliest Peace Corps volunteer. You've seen the agency, as you said, since 1967. So how would you talk about the culture of the Peace Corps?
Actually, 64. Well, I have to say, since I was one of the earlier volunteers, I don't know that in 1964 we had much of a Peace Corps culture. We were in the process of inventing one and developing one as time moved on. So I do think, however, that the Peace Corps culture got centered around many of the reasons why people joined. And certainly in my cohort, many of us came into the Peace Corps because we were part of a shared experience of America in 1963, and a couple of years before, Jack Kennedy had asked us to ask not what our country could do for us, but what we might do for our country. And many of the volunteers that I knew then and now came into the Corps with the sense of a need to be in service in some way to this very amorphous and ambiguous country and the values that held it together. But I know that we all came in that way, and much of what we shared together and began to develop was centered around that. And it was also centered around a way of reflecting on our own lives here in America, which was, as it is now, in great transition. This is 1963, 64, the civil rights movement, great upheaval. In between that and Vietnam and the feminist movement and everything that caused not only great upheaval but great cultural reflection. We came into the Corps as volunteers who wanted to reflect on our own culture by and through experiencing other places, other times, other peoples, and joining in their own reflections about cultural change. So I think that's the sort of center of where we came from, but I know everybody else afterwards has more to that than we had in the early days.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Raina. Let me turn to Alana, to Joseph, because many of us have had the great opportunity to watch your film, A Towering Task, where you interviewed dozens of RPCVs. So how would you characterize a culture of the Peace Corps?
Well, I think there are a couple different elements to it, because there's Peace Corps headquarters, and then there are the different countries, and every country has its own culture, and every era has its own culture. So there are so many different elements to the Peace Corps culture. But one unifying piece that I see is, Peter Hessler in the documentary talks about how the Peace Corps teaches you humility. So you have all these people coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, and but when they come in with all that idealism and all that energy, after 2 years, everybody has been humbled. Everybody has learned some lessons, learned to listen, learned that they don't know all that much, and that they can learn so much from another culture. And so I think humility is one of those incredibly unifying things amongst Peace Corps volunteers. And now that there are more and more returned Peace Corps volunteers entering headquarters too, that culture is bonded a lot more between headquarters and the field, I would imagine. And Carol could speak to that more too. And then the other part of that culture, I think, is grit, is that tenacity of sticking it out, of failing and dusting yourself off and trying again and trying to grow as an individual. So I don't think there was a single Peace Corps volunteer that we talked to who didn't say that their experience was transformative. And even the ones who had a bad experience or who didn't like their Peace Corps service, they still said, it transformed me. I learned so much from it. And I think that is one of the greatest strengths of the Peace Corps.
Okay. Thank you, Alana. Rahama, coming from your Peace Corps family, how would you answer that question about shared culture of the Peace Corps?
Yeah, I would say that curiosity is definitely one of them. When you're a Peace Corps volunteer, typically you're someone who's very curious about the world. You want to expand not only your knowledge, but your experiences beyond your country of origin. And so the way that I experienced Peace Corps was in my courses as an undergrad. I read about different parts of the world and I learned about different parts of the world, but to actually move to a completely foreign community, the difference in terms of culture, everything from the food, the language, the way of doing, I think that you have to be curious and you have to want to see the world outside of the way that you've been raised and what you've been exposed to. And I think that that's one of the unique things that Peace Corps allows volunteers to be able to do, is to experience the world and expand it so that you recognize that someone might be different from you, but we all share a common humanity. And the experience I had at a community health center with no health background, by the way, and working with the community nurse and seeing, women come into the community health center and seeing the issues and the challenges, but also recognizing the amount of resilience and the fact that at no point in time in my entire Peace Corps experience in Mali did I ever feel unwelcomed. And this just love from complete strangers and people in my community just embracing and accepting me, even though I wasn't from there. And I think when you have those experiences and you recognize that even in a strange and different land, you can find friendship and connection and family, that does change you. It changes the way that you view yourself. It changes the way that you view other people. And that expansion of experience is something that you bring back when you finish your service.
Okay, thank you, Rahma. I'd like to ask Carol Spahn. So Carol, you've seen the Peace Corps from many different vantage points, as a volunteer in Romania, as a country director, and now as acting director for the entire agency. So what's your perspective on the culture of the Peace Corps?
Well, I'll say with every Peace Corps group that arrived in Malawi, I told them that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And Peace Corps has a culture of people really stretching. And I said, even getting on that plane to come here and to suspend, your life in the United States, to suspend judgment, to open yourself up. These are people with open hearts who are willing to take risk, and who are doers, who are people who don't want to sit on the sidelines and watch life go by, or see something in society that they don't, believe in or that they think is an injustice. These are people who want to do something, however big or small. They want to participate in the world and to celebrate difference and to stretch themselves. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. Alana, you talked about the transformation. During my time as country director in Malawi, I believe we had almost 500 volunteers come through Malawi during that time. And you see them walk off the plane and go on this journey with them of that transformation. And you see them at the end of those 2 years. And I had a close of service exit interview with each and every one of them and would ask, what are you most proud of? And almost every single one said, I'm most proud of the relationships that I developed during my time. And many of these people accomplished great things, that they could point to, number of people that they'd reached, or, a library that they built or something of that nature. But they really spoke about how deeply they were touched by the people they met and the relationships.
Thank you, Carol. For anyone who's just joining us, this is a panel discussion, the Peace Corps at 60 and Beyond, a Towering Task panel discussion. Here with Carol Spahn, Alana DeJoseph, Raina Green, and Rahma Wright. I'd like to follow up on how you've been describing the Peace Corps culture, to ask more specifically about projects. And this is where maybe you can talk about the projects that you accomplished as a Peace Corps volunteer. But how does the Peace Corps work with host countries and host communities to determine their needs and determine the projects that will take place? Maybe we'll start with Rahma, because you were a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali.
Yeah. Sure. So when I joined the Peace Corps, we had a couple days of training. I believe it was 2 or 3 days in Philly, where everyone came to one point. And then we flew together as a unit. And there were about 55 people in my group from all over the US. And then we flew into Bamako. And then from Bamako, there was a training village that we lived at for 10 weeks, basically. And during that time, you were trained in language training. You were trained in your sector, you were trained in the history of the country, the culture of the country, and all the training was done by local staff members. And after those 10 weeks, you would then go to your village that you would live in for the remainder of the 2 years that we lived in Mali. And It was really good to have the initial 10 weeks of training within our core group, because it's a way to really acclimate and get used to the culture and the community in, you know, an environment where it's incredibly supportive. You have your other Peace Corps colleagues and you're learning together before you go separate, and everyone kind of has their communities that they're assigned to. And so that part of really intensive training in the beginning, I think, is so important. And having that training being done by locals was also really, really important to kind of acclimate to the environment before your service started. Now, every community that gets a Peace Corps volunteer, at least in Mali, they're invited. You're just not put into a random community. That community has asked for a Peace Corps volunteer. They want to have a Peace Corps volunteer in their community. And it's something that is done months before you're actually assigned to that community. And I think in some cases, it might even be years before. And so my community was a rural community. Some people are assigned to rural villages, large towns, and cities. And so I was a volunteer in a village. And my assignment was to work at the community health center. And so the nurse, and within my village, there was a nurse that I worked directly with, but then there was a community contact. And in Mali, that name was a homologue. And so my homologue, which essentially was my key person in the community, that if I had any challenges or any issues, I would go to my homologue. And my homologue was essentially like the local partner that I would work with on a variety of different projects. But my day-to-day assignment was to go to the community health center and support the nurse in any way that she needed. And I realized very quickly that a lot of people coming to my community health center had a lot of issues around accessing health services. We provided pre and postnatal care primarily. And so that got me thinking about other ways to support women in my community, which led me down this path of researching income generating activities, which led me to Shea Butter. And so even though I had a core project, I also had the freedom and flexibility to work on other things if I identified them as an issue. And so with my homologue and the Women's Association, that's when I started doing more work outside of the health center and doing community organizing around income generating activities for women. So more so like business activities and working with women to help them identify ways to create a product that they could generate income from. So that kind of gives you my experience, but depending on the country, depending on the sector that you're in, it can be different, but that was my experience.
Yeah, thank you, Rahma. Let me ask you, Carol, maybe to follow up on what Rahma was just saying, is the Peace Corps contemplating changes in projects as far, to give communities more agency, community buy-in, and sustainability?
Of course. Well, I mean, Peace Corps' primary tenet is that we are first invited by the country that we are working in, and we work very closely with the various ministries in that country to identify the areas that would be most impactful, as well as the sites. So we are very much, involved with the community in developing the assignments. And then we train the volunteers as they're going into those communities to do participatory community analysis, to work with an asset-based model in terms of what is in that community and what their needs are. So the overall model is really based on one of very deep respect for the community, for what's in the community already. Our primary goal is capacity building. It is not bringing funds, into a community. It is to bring knowledge and shared resources and to work together on those projects. So it is very much, there's tremendous community agency in the core of what we do and the core of how we approach our work.
All right, thank you, Carol. Alana, let me ask you. So you were a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali, but you've also had this experience of talking to, how many Peace Corps volunteers did you interview? And so how would you characterize this idea of kind of the projects, the communities, the sense of agency for those communities, community buy-in, and promoting just what Carol was saying about sustainability?
Well, I think from all the volunteers we talked to, that was one of the strongest suits of Peace Corps throughout history, was teaching the listening part, teaching okay, this is not about you coming in with solutions. This is about, in the 60s, they called it felt needs. What are the felt needs of the community? You spend your early time finding out what the felt needs are, and then you try to be supportive in some way. And, we have Kirby Jones in the documentary who talks about being in this neighborhood where there was no running water and no electricity, but what the community wanted was street names. They wanted street names and numbers on the houses because they wanted to be able to receive mail. So that's what he then helped accomplish. And then, projects developed out of that. And so for me, a lot of Peace Corps volunteers have great stories of great projects that they've accomplished. And when I was a volunteer, I was a small enterprise development volunteer, so a business volunteer. And we always envied the water volunteers because they could, at the end of the day, they could point to a well and said, I built that well, or, the community and I, we got together and we built this well. And at the end of the day, I would always ask myself, what did I really get accomplished? I'm not exactly sure. And I think for a lot of volunteers, that came across as this ambivalence about how effective they were with the work that they did. And, the Peace Corps' mission is world peace and friendship, but that world peace and friendship is supposed to be accomplished through 3 goals. And the first goal is to help countries that request it with their manpower, to help them with their power of skilled people. And then the second goal is for other cultures to get to know Americans, and the third goal for Americans to get to know other cultures. So goal 2 and goal 3 are cultural exchange goals. They're not development goals. And so when volunteers come back, they often question, how effective was I with goal 1? How effective was I with goal 2 and goal 3? And I think the further away we get from our Peace Corps service, the stronger that sense comes from that cultural exchange was incredibly important and had maybe more lasting effects than anything I ever did with goal 1.
All right. Thank you, Ilana. Well, actually, that's a nice segue to Raina in terms of what you just said about the longer you are from your Peace Corps service. So, Raina, you having the longest time since your Peace Corps service, can you tell us what you think about kind of this idea of projects and communities and working together, either from your own experience in Ethiopia in the mid-1960s or what you've been following since?
Back in the olden days, in fact, we didn't have those goals as highly articulated as Ilana perfectly outlines them. Not at all. I think the last 2, that is getting to know another world and another world getting to know us, were pretty much in everybody's mind. But this notion of the highly definitive notion of anything beyond sort of felt needs, or in our case in Ethiopia, needs of the country ordered by the emperor, were not shared necessarily by the communities that we went to. We were all teachers. That was all that was allowed in Ethiopia at the time. So we all were trained, not in country, by the way. I so longed for that, but that did not happen. We were all trained at UCLA, for heaven's sake, by Ethiopians. But we were put there to do very specific tasks, teaching, in my case, in a teacher training school. We were given very specific tasks, most of them teaching English, but not necessarily all of us. We were told to teach history. In my case, we learned the pivoting act that lots of volunteers go through. I ended up teaching Ethiopian history and world history. Good heavens. but that's part of the Peace Corps culture too, to learn to pivot, as they say nowadays. But I think we had, in those earlier days, we had to find the tasks and the projects and the things beyond our given scope of work. We had to find the things that the community did want, apart from what they had been told they wanted, which was us teaching. And I, for example, in the context of teaching, found the library as the thing that drew me there. All the students complained that they could not go and take books out. They could not take books home. They could not hold the books except in the library. And I thought, good Lord, the whole notion of a public library and access to it obviously is something that is needed here. So I begged to be assigned to the library and was able to go in and see the needs of the students and see the needs of other teachers and of the community, and be able to work with the librarian at the time to open access to the library, to get more books, from which I got them from all sorts of places all over the world. But the point is there that in the earlier days, I think we had to sort all this out in many ways, depending on where you were and who you were with, and whether the community actually welcomed you. P.S. The community I was in, the school community, were not exactly welcomed. Peace Corps was not exactly welcomed there. It was a Muslim town, a centrally Muslim school, and they did not necessarily welcome all these girls appearing and thinking that they needed to be involved. So we had to work very hard to find a way to do things and work in a world that was not necessarily open at the time we came there. And that's part of the whole Peace Corps culture too, in the places where we needed to learn enough to open those doors that weren't necessarily open before, because we weren't invited there. The emperor invited us there. And my principal in the school did not, but we worked it out.
Okay, thank you, Raina. So I do want to save time for questions from the audience, but let me ask one more question of our four panelists, which gets at, our title for this program is the Peace Corps at 60 and Beyond. So let's talk about the beyond. What do you see as the future of the Peace Corps? So when service resumes, how can the Peace Corps address issues such as racial justice and operating in a post-COVID environment? And maybe you can also talk about what your own personal future might be. But let me start with Carol Spahn as acting director of the Peace Corps. You're right there at the leadership of plotting a future for the Peace Corps at 60 and beyond. So tell us a little bit, Carol, about what you see as the future of the Peace Corps.
Well, thank you, Jim. First, I want to just acknowledge that it's been a very difficult year. As you are all aware, we evacuated all 7,000 of our volunteers in 8 short days as a part of the as the pandemic was raging in March, mid-March. We're coming up on almost a year ago. That was incredibly traumatic for our volunteers and for the communities they serve. And I will say that every single country that we evacuated is very anxious to have volunteers back. And that is based on 60 years of trust, 60 years of relationships, 60 years of working side by side. So they are very anxious to have us back when it is safe to do so. So as an organization, we are carefully watching every country, evaluating how they're doing, making sure that conditions will be safe for volunteers, for our staff, and for the host communities that we serve. So that is our first priority. And we're working very closely with those governments to identify what their needs are. The global pandemic is something that has affected every single country around the world, and it has left us isolated. We've had a very divisive period in our own country. And there is a tremendous role for Peace Corps in rebuilding world peace and friendship, one relationship at a time. I can't imagine any time in history that Peace Corps is needed more than it is now. And I had the pleasure of being on a panel or watching a panel where we had 11 of the former Peace Corps directors, all of the living former Peace Corps directors, and they were asked, if you had 3 minutes, with President Biden, what would you tell him? And to a T, they all said, double the size of the Peace Corps. Now is the time. It's needed more than ever. We expect as all of those volunteers go back that they will be participating in recovery from the global pandemic, depending on what their needs are in country, be that assistance with vaccination campaigns, mobilizing local communities, doing water and sanitation work for infection prevention. This is a situation that will be with us for some time, and the ground has shifted. We need to shift and adjust as the conditions shift.
All right, thank you, Carol. Let me ask Alana, maybe you can talk about what you see as the future of the Peace Corps at this pivotal moment in the agency's history.
Sure. Well, I think Carol brought up this really good point that this pandemic really has, in a very drastic way, shown every country in the world that we're all in the same boat. And, when we produced the documentary, one of the guiding lights that we used was a quote by Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson. She said, if you've come to help, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And really, since the beginning of the Peace Corps, volunteers have been at the forefront of global problems like climate change. Volunteers were working in agriculture and forestry and fisheries and whatnot, and at the forefront in the countries that are bearing the brunt of climate change and that are bearing the brunt of the public health crises. So this is nothing new that we're all in the same boat, but this is a really, really tangible example, this pandemic, for everybody that we are. And so for Peace Corps now to be able to be so visible in addressing these global problems of climate change, of public health, of mass migration, and really not just being this afterthought of Peace Corps is quaint, it's mom's apple pie, it's mostly harmless. Peace Corps is doing crucial work, and in the 60s, it might have really seemed like the long game, but right now we're seeing it with COVID. It's tangible. It's right here, and Peace Corps is crucial to give us that person-to-person connection at the grassroots level, at that last mile of development.
Thank you, Alana. Rahma, can you talk about what you see as the future for the Peace Corps at this time?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question. And, I'm just going to quote or paraphrase James Baldwin here for a minute, which is, whatever is not faced cannot be changed. So I think that to what Raina was talking about earlier, when she was a Peace Corps volunteer, America as a country was at the intersection of a lot of different things. And I feel like today in 2021, we're seeing a lot of those same challenges in our country, particularly around race and inclusion. And, I would be remiss to not touch upon that as a Black Peace Corps volunteer and some of the things that I see, even in my own experience, but I see even today that we're grappling with as a country. And I believe that in order for us to be a stronger organization, we need to be able to look at inclusion. We need to be able to look at how to make this organization more diverse, and also how to make this organization a safe space for people to be able to show up as their authentic selves. And it is something that I don't think a lot of people feel very comfortable talking about, because it's an issue it's hard to talk about, right? But today in 2021, we're recognizing that as Americans, we are better when we embrace our differences. We are better when we create opportunities for all. And for the Peace Corps, I believe that the Peace Corps can only become better and stronger when we're able to show the diversity of America. And so my hope is that we'll have many more conversations around this issue of inclusion and recognize that part of the reason why we don't have as many diverse RPCVs is because of the fact that in our country, there's a lot of inequality. And to be able to step away for 2 years is a privilege. And it's a privilege that many of us cannot do because of inequality. And so for me, I'm committing myself to, we are all ambassadors in a sense when you do the Peace Corps and, you return back. And I'm really proud of the fact that I've been able to use my experience to get other people of color to join the Peace Corps since coming back to the US. And I think that being that ambassador and being able to connect with other volunteers of color to show that this is something that is available to all Americans is, something that I think that we need to do more of. And so Peace Corps, 60 years from now, will be an organization that represents more clearly the diversity that we have in America. And I also think that when you're an RPCV, when you come back from your service, there is a responsibility to do that third goal, which is to share your experience with your families, with your communities, with your neighbors. And I feel very lucky and very fortunate that I'm living the third goal every day through my business model, through the work that I'm doing with Shailene. And it's something that I wouldn't be doing if I hadn't lived in Mali for 2 years. And so being able to use our Peace Corps experience as a way to just become better global citizens and change not only inequality here in the US, but globally by some of the things that we do when we come back home.
Thank you, Rahma. Let me ask Raina. So, Raina, as you're a historian at our National Museum of American History. But let me ask you not to look back, but to look towards the future. What do you see as the future of the Peace Corps?
Actually, I've been thinking a lot about that. I had always imagined, and I think now today, that I wish that the Peace Corps was sort of a two-pronged piece. That part of it was that part that went out from this place to all of those other places and to all of those other people. And the other half of it, if it is a half, would turn back here. And I think we never really developed Vista AmeriCorps in the way we should have. I think people should think about their own communities. Peace Corps taught me, by the way, a lot about how to work in my own community, which I did for the rest of my life as a professional and as a human being. It's part of the community. So I would like to see. I mean, COVID taught us that. Look at the communities in the United States that are absolutely devastated and have been for a long time. I mean, when you think the Navajo Nation is out there and it has no water, there's a job to do. There's a huge job to do. And maybe we have the skills from elsewhere that we can turn back to our own communities. And maybe now we have the openness to all the things Rahama was talking about, to see that we must turn inward as well as outward, and bring the inward outward, if you will, to make things different place, a different world.
All right. Well, thank you, Raina. So I'd like now to turn to questions that we're getting from the audience. You can drop questions into our live chat. We've already received a couple. Let me start with a question for Carol. So it's kind of a two-part question, one from Norma and one from Iris, about what the Peace Corps is doing to work with people with disabilities as Peace Corps volunteers. And Norma was asking specifically about Peace Corps volunteers who are deaf or hard of hearing. So do you think the Peace Corps, in what ways is the Peace Corps prioritizing working with people with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'd like to actually follow on to Rahama's comments about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a critical conversation to be having at this time, and one that is so core to the values of Peace Corps and what we're all about, which is celebrating difference, providing opportunity, being inclusive in our approaches. And it's something that the agency has worked on diligently over the years and really been able to expand representation from a variety of groups. I believe about 35% of the volunteers in 2019 were from minorities, which means that we still have work to do. But that is up from about 19% just 10 years ago. So it has been an area of focus. And we have also worked extensively with our teams in country who have gone through a full 40-hour week of diversity, equity, and inclusion training so that they are ready to meet volunteers as they're coming in their full identities and to meet them and welcome them where they are. Does that mean that we are finished? Absolutely not. We are listening, and we're listening to the experiences of various groups of volunteers who have sent in recommendations and shared their experiences. And we're very, very grateful to that. We understand just how difficult it can be. So we as an agency are doing a very deep dive into our structures, into our systems, into our training. We are taking a holistic, whole of agency approach during this time when there are no volunteers in the field to reevaluate and to adjust and to meet this moment. It is an important moment that we are all called upon to act and to address in a way that is systemic. And I find myself really tugging at these joint pressures because we all want to do something right now, and the work of taking on systemic racism, injustice, inequality, inequities takes time, and we want to do it deliberately and intentionally so that it becomes even more a part of our culture. So we're very much thinking about that and very much aware of the need to communicate better about what we're doing inside the agency, because there is a lot of really tremendous work happening right now in that space. As it relates, I'm really glad that someone asked about deaf volunteers, because we are very actively recruiting right now for some volunteers to work in deaf education in Kenya. And I'll just put a plug in because they've had a hard time recruiting. Please do go onto the website and apply. There are opportunities for deaf volunteers in Peace Corps and for volunteers with disabilities. We want to make sure that we're placing people in the right countries that have the right kinds of services to be able to meet their needs. And we are actively working with our posts so that they are able to meet the needs of those volunteers. We want Peace Corps to be available to everyone. We've also done a lot of work on the recruiting side. And Rahama, you mentioned this. It is a luxury to be able to give up 2 years of your life to serve. And it can even be expensive to apply when you look at all of the medical costs and things that are needed for medical clearance. So we just did a review of those costs, and we increased medical reimbursements by 3 times so that volunteers who don't have medical insurance or applicants who don't have medical insurance, that is not a barrier for them in applying to the Peace Corps. So this is something that we do take very, very seriously, and I really do appreciate the questions, and I appreciate all the feedback. We can only get better by listening and understanding people's experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. We have a question from Iris specifically for Rahma. What can you tell us about how Peace Corps volunteers have helped improve shea butter women's cooperatives in Africa? And what do you think about Peace Corps volunteers' role in helping communities adapt to climate change through tree crops?
Well, any question about shea butter, I love. So thank you for that question. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, it was the first time I was even exposed to the fact that this amazing product, it comes from sub-Saharan Africa. You cannot find the tree anywhere else in the world. It's connected to the lives of women, approximately 16 million women from West to East Africa. And there's a huge, tremendous opportunity to change the global shea butter industry so that women in their rural communities can actually generate sufficient income, generate living wages so that they can care for themselves and their families and improve their communities. And so I am on the shea train. Like, I believe so deeply that this natural resource has a power to transform communities. And in terms of how Peace Corps volunteers have been playing a role, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali, there was not a lot of work being done around how to support shea butter producers, how to support women around this commodity, around this resource. But when I visited a couple of years after my service, there were volunteers in every region working on shea. And I was actually supporting, through Shea Aline, we were providing very small grants to Peace Corps volunteers to do trainings within their villages and their communities. And so it was something that I had a passion for, and I was seeing other Peace Corps volunteers also working on it, not only in Mali, but also in Ghana. Today, we work with shea butter producers in northern Ghana across 14 different villages. And so for me, I think that, you know, as a lot of us have spoken already, our goal as Peace Corps volunteers and anyone really working in international development, we're not there to tell local community members what to do and how to live their lives. We're there as a resource, as facilitators. We can help identify solutions to problems, but it's a co-creation. You have to partner with the local community. And one of the things that I don't think we talk about enough is many community members already know the solutions to their problems. They already have the answers, but they lack capacity. They lack access to the resources to get to those solutions. And that's where we can play this incredible role of being facilitators, of being connectors. When we brought the shea producers from Ghana to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Folklife Festival, we were giving them an opportunity to get more visibility for something that they've been doing for hundreds of years. We're not teaching them to do something that they're doing. They're already doing it. So we're facilitating, we're opening doors, we're providing connections that they have a much harder time getting access to. And so the question around what is the role of Peace Corps volunteers when it comes to issues like climate change, when it comes to issues like poverty alleviation, well, our role is to support the community in their solutions. Our role is to allow community members to be the authors of their solutions, and we perform that connection. We help provide some of the resources that might be missing. And so I want to make sure that people understand that part of it, because it's so important for local community members to have autonomy and to have decision-making ability and to feel like they are part of the solution versus people from the outside coming in and telling them what to do. And with Shea Aline's business model, we're connecting women who are far removed from the marketplace directly to the market. We're helping them achieve things that they couldn't do on their own, but utilizing a traditional practice that they've been doing for so long. And my, privilege and access to resources as an American, as a diaspora, as first gen, as an immigrant, I'm able to see those connections that they might not be able to see. And so that's the role that we perform.
Yeah. And can I ask, Rahama, if I were trying to find Shailene products, where might I find them?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking. And I just want to give a shout out to Carol, who actually supported us recently with a purchase.
They're terrific.
So you can visit our website, shailene.com. And you can also now find us at Macy's. So if you go to Macy's, you can find Shailene products.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. I guess maybe we'll ask this of Carol. It's a question that came to us from a viewer on YouTube. What is limiting the growth of the Peace Corps if you're thinking of doubling? Is it a lack of applicants, lack of funding, or something else?
Well, so the Peace Corps funding has been flat for the last 5 or 6 years. So funding is certainly an issue. With the right funding, we can get the word out and, look at our systems and, bring more and more people in. It is such a transformative experience, and such an opportunity for people to be in communion with one another, to have that opportunity to learn from one another. And it's incredibly uniting. And I think it's very, very important, particularly at this time in our history, to open up those opportunities to as many people as we can, both from the countries that we serve, as well as the volunteers that go in that spirit of humility and partnership.
And let me ask Alana, having worked on a towering task, do you have a current film project on the horizon?
Well, I would love to do a towering task too, because of course we finished the documentary in 2019, before the pandemic came around, before all volunteers were evacuated, and it was just a musing of what would the future of the Peace Corps look like. And then these dramatic changes happened to the Peace Corps after we finished the documentary. We are currently in conversation with public television to broadcast this film on public television. And if we do so, we will be able to re-edit a little bit, add a slate at the back, say, okay, and on March 15th, all volunteers were evacuated, by the way. But I think these next 5 years, these next 5 to 10 years for the Peace Corps are going to be absolutely fascinating, because Bill Josephson, the founding general counsel of the Peace Corps, said to me, this is going to be a towering task too. What is going to happen with the Peace Corps? Because rebuilding is not going to be easy. And Carol, I do not envy you what position you're in, because it's not just a matter of just grabbing these volunteers that were just evacuated and plugging them right back in. A lot of people have moved on. And so now we have to recruit more again. And it's looking at the Peace Corps itself. This is an incredible opportunity to reevaluate what should Peace Corps volunteers be doing, what should the systems within the Peace Corps look like. It's going to be really hard. And what a fabulous case study for a documentary of not just how do you build a government agency, but how do you rebuild after taking everybody out of the field.
Okay.
Build back better.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have to end by 8 o'clock. So I'm 8 o'clock Eastern. So we're gonna wrap up. One thing to note is that A Towering Task, we have arranged for it to be available for, I believe, another day for anyone who still has not had a chance to watch it. Also, we'll be sharing on screen where and when the 4 panelists served in the Peace Corps. But I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their experiences and their insights: Carol Spahn, Alana DeJoseph, Rahama Wright, and Raina Green. I'd like to thank the audience for participating, all of those who watched, listened, and commented. And I'd like also to close by offering thanks to our production team: Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Ginny Maycock, Diane Nutting, Alex Taggart, and Sabrina Lynn Motley for their efforts. And thanks also to the National Peace Corps Association and the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience for their support. So please follow Smithsonian Folklife page on Facebook to get notifications about future events. You can find us also on Instagram or YouTube. Visit our website, festival.si.edu, and come back here for our next programs. Thanks again to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.